Well, as you know, we've been talking about the qualifications of elders. I'm going to go ahead and ask this to have two young men are going to pass out some materials, some things I said I was going to have for you. It's 2 pages, 3 pages. One is front and back. Very simple, self-explanatory, and yeah, go ahead. It's for your benefit to help you. I would say some things that are already written in here, but I'm going to say some anyway. These are not for you to return back to me. This is not like a test or a quiz that you can, just fill it out and you're graded on it or anything like that. This is a guide. This is for you and your benefit. And the reason for that is because we're going through the process of selecting men to be elders, and the only 3 men that have been brought up, James Gumpert, Don Stewart, and myself. No one else has said they wanted to be a part of that. That doesn't mean that they're excluded, but we just don't know of any other men. So this is the process that we're going to go through. And it's our job as a church to make sure that we do our diligence to ensure that the men that are selected meet the qualifications and are people that we can all get behind. And because of that, we're going through a slow process. And I was talking yesterday to Don and James, and I said, I don't think there's any way anyone's going to look at us and accuse us of going through this quickly, because we're painstakingly going through this slow to make sure that we have everything covered. Now, what this is for is for you to look through. If you're reasonably confident about these things, check off the boxes, that's fine. You do it however you want to do it. But if there are questions that come up and you think, I'm not sure about this one, I need to talk to someone, I would advise you, don't go to talking to other people about it. Go to the person that you're questioning about that. It only makes sense, because then you might have a misunderstanding and you can clear it up and feel better about it. Or you may have a legitimate point that needs to be brought up and discussed with that person to find out if you can still feel okay about that or not. And then, of course, at the end of this process, we're going to have a congregational meeting. Everyone is invited. And it's going to be question and answer. And that's when, if you're not satisfied that your objection or concern was addressed well enough by the person that you talked to, bring it up in the meeting, because everyone else may not realize it. No one else may have thought of it. And so we bring it up and we discuss it, and then we can go and go from there as far as whether or not they're going to be installed. There's 2 ways of looking at this. I don't believe it's a congregational vote. The scriptures have appointment of elders. It's not a popularity contest. That's not what this is intended to be about. But at the same time, it's also not intended to be about 3 men stand up and say, we're going to be your leaders and you have to accept it, like it or not. It's not that either. It can't be that. But there has to be some way of communication so that we all can be in agreement. And if we're not in agreement, we need to work it out and work it out in a way that we will find agreement. And we can't proceed unless there's agreement in some degree. And that means for each of the 3 of us, we've discussed it. And if any one of us or all of us or the congregation as a whole says, no, we just don't want to do this, or the congregation brings up legitimate points, this cannot happen, all 3 of us are willing and ready to step aside. This is not a matter of pride. This is a matter of service. And so if that's what you want, good. If not, then we hope that the Lord will help us through this process and that He'll bless us in the church. I do know one thing for sure: the church needs elders. And I was asked about the timing of it. I have no idea. Somebody said, is this the right time? I don't know. Does anyone ever know? I know that in my mind, when the opportunity arises and there are people who meet the qualifications, it seems to me like it's a pretty good time for it. If we don't have any qualified men, when I first got here, my first question is, why don't we have elders? And the answer was, no one's qualified. Well, if we have 3 men who are qualified, why don't we have elders? That's a question. That's a legitimate question. And as far as my concern and the way I see it, the only way as a preacher, I have to look at this and say, well, it seems to me we have qualified men, but I'm not the one who appoints them. I'm not the one who decides that. So we put it out to the congregation. You all get to make that decision, that determination. And of course, we leave it in God's hand. Now, having said that, there are a couple passages that we need to address. And actually, Honestly, these passages don't affect any of the three men that are involved, but I've had questions, people wanting me to explain this a little bit more in detail. And so I want to notice some things about these two different issues that come up, the husband of one wife and believing children. So just get context. I want you to look in 1 Timothy chapter 3. And we have the first 7 verses of that chapter is about the qualifications of elders. And if you notice what he says here in verse 2, a bishop then must be, and the word must be there is a word in the Greek that means they have to be. This is not optional. These are not things that they, whatever, it's close enough. These are things that they must be, okay? One of the things it says they must be is they must be the husband of one wife. Also, if you look in verse 4, it says, one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. All right, that's a pretty broad statement. What does that actually mean? That's what we're going to discuss. Look over in Titus chapter 1. We have also the idea of elders here. Deacons aren't mentioned like 1 Timothy 3, but the elders are mentioned here in Titus, and that was one of the reasons that Titus was sent to the Isle of Crete to establish elders in every place. So he says in verse 7, a bishop must be blameless, steward of God, not self-willed, not quick-tempered. Look at what he says in, let's see here. Verse 6, if a man is blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination. Now, we have a little bit more information about the children here, and that is that they're not accused of dissipation or insubordination. And so the question comes up, okay, is he talking about children who are believers? This is the way it's generally recognized. Or are they talking about children who are growing up who are submissive to their father? Or both? And so that's part of what we have going on here. And there are questions that come up related to this. You would think in reading this, the common question, the common thing that I see is people say, well, it just means what it says. I agree, it means what it says. But sometimes there are questions that come up related to what it says that we have to understand in order to understand it more clearly, and that's the intention here. And so when I say this, I want to reiterate something that should be obvious, is that, and I know it's obvious to y'all, I am not Jesus. I am not Paul. I'm not an apostle. I'm going to give you the best that I can explain these things. And some of you will agree, and some of you will not agree. You know what? You don't have to leave mad. We can still talk about it. I'm also not the one that is the final say on what these things mean, okay? So let's keep that in mind as we're going through. The intention here is to understand it as best that we can and as logically as we can as we go through. So here are some considerations in for this first topic of being the husband of one wife. This is a difficult thing, and it's not difficult because it's unclear. It's difficult because of conditions that spring up, that have questions that come up. So we need to be open to options. This is actually for both of these things. We need to be open to the options that are available, and we need to apply wisdom as much as possible. And that's the only way we can approach it, right? So let's do this. There are two extremes to avoid. One extreme is I want to take the most conservative stance I can possibly take and exclude everything else because that's the only way to be sure of safety. That's not generally a wise way to go. And sometimes it is, but generally it's not, because we may go to such extremes that we actually bind where God has not bound. I don't want to be guilty of that any more than loosing where God has loosed. So the other extreme would be, these are just suggestions. It doesn't matter. I don't want to have either extreme. I want to respect God's word and understand it and apply it as best that we can. So here's the idea of the husband of one wife. We're going to look at three things. We're going to consider the grammar. We're going to talk about what it's not about, and we're going to talk about what it is about. Okay, so these will help us hopefully have a better understanding of this. I want to say also in discussing this, if you feel like I'm picking on you specifically, especially when we talk about marriages, sometimes it can kind of get a little dicey. If you think I'm talking about you, come talk to me about it, because I promise you I'm not. I'm simply talking about what the scriptures say. So let's talk about the grammar. The literal translation of this is a man belonging to one woman. Some people say a one-woman man or one woman's man. The terminology is important to recognize that.
It's a man who belongs to one woman. It doesn't say, well, let me just go on, because it doesn't say that there's one woman who belongs to him. It doesn't say that. It says that he belongs to one woman. That helps clarify things a little bit, although it's still not clear. It still helps clarify, because we're not talking about a man who possesses more than one wife. We're talking about a woman who possesses one or more men. And the scriptures say this woman cannot possess but one man. That's what this literally says. So he belongs to one person. All right, and it's also in present tense. I didn't actually realize that. I started looking at it. He said, must be. The word be is present tense, meaning it's not past tense, okay? It's present tense. It's not future tense either. That is, a present tense is an ongoing, especially in Greek, is an ongoing situation where this is a present situation with every intent of it continuing on. And unless things change, this is how he is. He must be the husband of one wife. Okay, so based on that, let's see some of the things that it's not talking about. All right, this is not talking about a previous marital condition. The reason it's not is because it says present tense, must be. Now, I realize there are questions that are come up. We're going to deal with those. The man's previous marital conditions is not under discussion here. It's not in any way in discussion. The statement simply is he is a man who has one wife, or actually, he is one woman's man. So this is not about whether he's a divorcee or a widower. For some reason, and I'm not being critical when I say this, for some reason we see widower and divorcee as completely different. I mean, I understand that they are different. I don't mean to imply that they're not. And it's more complicated when you talk about divorce. I understand that. But in the eyes of God, we're talking about a man who is either married or not married to a woman. That is what this is about. So it's not about whether a man was divorced in the past or whether he was a widower in the past and remarried, okay? This is what it's about. It's about current condition, which I already said. The question is, does he belong to only one woman? And that is the only stipulation in that. Does he belong to one woman? Or does he belong to one woman? And so if you're going to ask a question about it, that's the only question you can ask based on the grammar. And then we have to recognize that this is about character, okay? And as I go through this, you'll see more of what I'm talking about. This is about his character, and that's really what this is all about. This is under being a family man. He has to have certain characteristics. So what about the man who's had more than one marriage? Well, I think you already see some of the parts, but I want to stress, this is a serious issue. I'm not taking it lightly. The only thing Don and I disagreed on this. And he asked me, what do you think? I said, I have to teach what I know. I have to teach the way I see it. And I cannot change it simply because someone else disagrees with me. So this is a serious issue, and I say this humbly. These are my opinions. This is the way I see it. Also, it doesn't say having been the husband of one wife. It says is the husband of one wife. You can't get around that. And the third point here is look in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 39. This is generally the way we look at. A lot of times I've talked to people who believed that a man with any women in his past, who's been married more than once, cannot be an elder again. It cannot be an elder, except some people believe in the case of his wife dying, the first wife dying. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 39. It says, a wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives, but if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Okay, this is a fundamental idea about marriage, that we are married until death, until one of the spouses dies, and there's no question about that. In fact, that's why Matthew chapter 19 is such a difficult passage when dealing with divorce and remarriage, because people are married until they die. So when that happens, though, their spouse dies, they are released from that. They are no longer married. They can't be married to a dead person. No longer married. And therefore, if they marry another person, that person only belongs to one woman. He doesn't belong to the previous woman. She's gone and she's dead. He, at this moment in time, only belongs to one woman. Now, if you believe that he belongs to more than one woman, you're claiming that he's still married to the first one who is dead, and that cannot be. So do you understand the significance of this, of understanding the present tense? Now, if it said, having been the husband of one wife, I would be all over that, saying, of course, he's been the husband of one wife, and he's married again. He's had two wives. It doesn't say whether or not he had two wives. It says whether or not he has two wives. And there's two ways that you can have two wives. One is polygamy. You can marry more than one, openly marry more than one at a time. And the second one is through the process of divorce and remarriage. Only under certain circumstances. That's what we need to look at. Look in Matthew chapter 19 in verse 9. This is like I said, it's complicated. It's complicated by our own changes to the reality, the perfect pristine example of what God wanted. Ideally, a man would be married to his wife his entire life, but that's not always the case. In Matthew chapter 19, I want you to notice in verse 9, he says, I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. All right, now I'm going to explain this very quickly. And if you have a question about this, let's talk about it later. But I want you to notice the language, what he says. I say to you, whoever divorces his wife. Now, let's look at this word, except for sexual immorality. We're going to actually set this aside for a moment, because this is a phrase, it's a conditional phrase. It changes the meaning a little bit, but we're going to take it aside so we see the main phrase. The main teaching that Jesus has here is this. Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. That's as plain as you can put it. That's the simple sentence. If you divorce your wife and you marry someone else, you're committing adultery against that woman. Now, there's some terms here that are important. The word adultery is a word that implies marriage. You cannot commit adultery if you are not married. You can commit fornication with someone who is married if you're not married. You can commit fornication with someone who is is in marriage, and that person would be committing adultery, but you cannot commit adultery unless you're married. It's impossible, because the word means sexual intercourse inside a marriage that God has not authorized. So you're in a marriage and you go outside the marriage for sexual intercourse. That's what adultery is. And that's a simplistic way of looking at it. I'm trying to get to the cut to the chase here. So if a man divorces his wife and marries someone else, he's committing adultery, not fornication. He's committing adultery against his first wife. The only implication of that is that he's still bound to her in some way, because God has not recognized that they could separate. He didn't authorize it. But Jesus then put in an exception. And it's the only exception that's in Scripture, except for fornication. So if a man is married to his wife and she commits adultery, she commits fornication, that man would then, according to this, be free to divorce and remarry someone else without himself committing adultery. That's the force of what he's saying. It's impossible for that man to commit adultery because God says, except for fornication. Now, in the case of fornication, this can be dissolved, and that person is free to remarry, and he is not married to that first. He's not bound to her in any way anymore. He is married to this one man. This one woman. That brings up a whole another issue. But okay, so that's the force of what he's saying here. So what we have to understand about that is this. If a man is divorced for fornication, he is no longer her man. He's not hers anymore. He's gone. He's not bound to her. If he divorces for any other reason than fornication, he's still bound to her, because if he goes and marries someone else, he's committing adultery. Well, you commit adultery against the spouse that you had. He's not committing adultery against his new wife. He's committing adultery against his old wife because he's bound to her. But if there's fornication involved, he is free to remarry. That means that man who has his wife has committed adultery, it's a whole other situation about what that wife can do, but a wife has committed adultery, he is free to divorce and remarry someone else without any problems, without any adultery, without being bound to anyone else. He is hers. He only belongs to her and no one else. No one else has a claim on him other than her. And whether or not people agree with that statement is irrelevant because it's exactly what Jesus says here. There's just no way around it. And so we can complicate things, but this is what it's about. So if he's divorced for fornication, he's no longer her man, and that's why he can marry someone else. That's the only reason he can marry someone else. And it goes for women too. If your husband cheats on you, you're free to divorce and remarry someone else. I wouldn't in any way think that if you cheat on your spouse, that means that qualifies you to divorce and marry someone else. That's certainly not what he means. But the innocent spouse there, obvious. All right, so this is why he can marry another person. Here's the implication of this. To claim that a scripturally divorced and remarried man, this is a man who is divorced because of the rule of fornication and marries someone else, is not the husband of one wife, means that he is still bound to the first woman. And Jesus said he wasn't. You cannot claim that he's bound to the original spouse if Jesus said he wasn't bound. If he said that he committed adultery when he married her, he would have meant that he was still bound to that first woman. But he said that's an exception. The exception is he can remarry, and it doesn't have any bearing on committing adultery. It doesn't have anything to do with the woman that was previous because he's not bound but to one person. There's only one woman that has a claim on him. Unless there's circumstances of fornication involved, that first woman still has a claim on him in the way God explains things. So that's why this is such an important idea. Here's some more considerations, though. So you might say, well, I see what you're saying. You're just trying to convince us of this. No, I tell you, I told people when I started talking about this, I'm going to offend both sides because I'm just trying to get to the truth. All right, so here's some more things to consider. First of all, we are talking about a quote-unquote a technicality. It could be a technicality with a checkbox, right? Isn't there a whole lot more to marriage than whether or not he was divorced scripturally in the past? That's an important consideration, and it very, very well may be the most important consideration in that marriage, but there's a whole lot more going on, especially when we're talking about leaders and elders, right? So we don't want to just look at this, well, he's free he's technically married appropriately, but we don't want to consider anything else. Now, there are some other things. And here's an example. I was talking to Carla about this, and she said, I think it was a woman. I'm thinking it was a man. This rock star was being interviewed. And they said, what do you think about monogamous relationships? And this man was notorious from just jumping from one woman to another. He said, I'm monogamous, one woman at a time. And when she said that, she had heard that, I thought, really? Is that really what we mean when we say we want a monogamous man? That this week I'm monogamous, next week I may have another woman. Obviously, that's not what he meant when he said the husband of one wife, that you can just jump from marriage to marriage. As long as you're living together, as long as you're married, it's okay. It doesn't matter if you had 13 or 20 or 6 or 2. It doesn't matter, right? Are we actually going to be the people to say that our character doesn't matter in that situation? Of course not. It does matter. This is why so many people have come to the conclusion that a divorced man can't be an elder. I completely understand that. You can't get there from the language, but you can get there perhaps in principle. So think about that. Also, was he abusive? Did he drive her to cheat? I'm in no way condoning a woman cheating on her husband and saying, well, it's his fault. That's not what I mean at all. I know of an example, a friend who abused his wife, withheld affection from her for years, wouldn't hardly even speak to her, treated her like, seriously, like a dog. She was his helpmeet. She was his slave. That's what he was. She was. And this man was a preacher. He was going around saving the world, but his wife was his obedient slave. And that's the only way to put it, because that's exactly what she was. And she found a man who loved her, and she ran off into his arms. No one had any idea about the way he was treating her. But when she ran off with another man, he was held up as a saint, because he's endured so much because of this one woman who did so many bad things to her. I'm not condoning her infidelity, but sometimes, not always, sometimes infidelity happens because there's two people involved in a marriage and not just one. Sometimes the character of the man drives the woman to cheat, and vice versa. It happens. We all know it happens. So does that mean that if someone is divorced and remarried that he was that way? No, it doesn't mean that at all. I'm not saying that. But shouldn't we at least consider it? Shouldn't we at least say, what kind of marriage have you had? What kind of man are you? If your wife, I tell you what, this would put it in more perspective. If you had 19 wives in your past and every one of them cheated on you, do you think maybe you might be part of the problem? Duh. What if it's one? I'm sure that if you are a husband and your wife cheated on you, or if you're a wife and your husband cheated on you in the past, I'm sure you've already worked out in your own mind how that happened, what you did or didn't do. I'm sure there's plenty of guilt, and this is not my intention to pile it on. My intention is to say, listen, if you're going to ask questions, and we're going to ask questions about the character of men, we've got to get real. We've got to get serious about it, and we've got to ask hard questions. And I promise you, there are hard questions. And I've talked to Don and James about this. I'm trying to warn them. I've never been through this, but I've seen how this works. I've been through plenty of interviews to know. Be brutal in your questions. Don't be mean, but don't be afraid to ask. Because why? The church future is counting on the decisions that we make here to a large degree. Jesus is still in control, but to a large degree. So there are a lot of things to consider. We can't just look at the technicality of it. So that's where I stand on it. Where do I stand? My personal opinion, there's nothing scripturally wrong with someone who's divorced becoming an elder if the divorce was for the right reasons. But I can't say if it's wise or not. I don't think it is, for many reasons. That's my opinion. So if you think about it, who do you trust with marital advice? A man who has been married for 50 years, or a man who's had 3 marriages for 50 years? When you're thinking about who you're going to go to, I've talked to people who said, I've actually heard someone say, if you're going to look for advice in marriage, go to the one who's been divorced the most, because they've learned the most lessons. They may have learned some lessons, yes. It may not have been the right lessons, but Carla, when we were first married, there was something I was doing that was really aggravating her for some reason. I don't know. Somebody at work found out about it, and they started giving her all this advice of stuff she had to do to make me right. And, she started looking around at those women, and every one of them had divorced at least twice. And she decided to just toss it aside because it might work, but that might be why they have on their 3rd husband. Maybe so. So would you trust someone who your marriage is in the dumps? And would you trust an elder who hasn't been able to figure out how to make the marriage work for more than 7 years before they had to get another one? It's a good question. They may be trustworthy. I'm not saying that they're not, but it's a question that ought to be considered. Also, would it detract from his work? It's very possible that it could. What about the 3rd one? Would it cause harm to the church? It's very, not only possible, it's likely that it would. Because I know when talking about these, there's still some of you who still disagree with what I was saying here. Even though I've shown you what it says, you're going to disagree with me, and that's fine. You have your right to think about that. And what man in his right mind would say that he's wanting to be an elder, be a leader, and his intentions are pure, but when several people stand up and say, this is a scriptural objection that I have to you, would not say, I'm not going to cause division in the church. It shouldn't happen. So there are men who are in this situation, who thought about becoming an elder, and they convinced themselves, they talked themselves out of it because of this very thing. That's commendable. And I in no way mean to insult or in any way those people. So let's look at the next one, the idea of believing children. We're going to consider the words, consider what it's not about, and consider what it is about. Sound familiar? All right, this is going to go a little bit quicker. Considering the words, 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 4, this is talking about how that they are, it says, children in submission with all reverence. The next one is Titus chapter 1 and verse 6. So keep that in mind. There's in submission with all reverence, and is in verse 6 of Titus 1, it says, having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination. So there's accusations here that they should be avoiding, and that is that they shouldn't be accused of being thwarting God's desires for them, being rebellious against God. And the word is sometimes translated debauchery. They're just living a life of sin. That's the idea. So look at the word. What this is not about, obviously, it's not about perfect children. It's not about perfect fathers. I'm so thankful for that one. It's not the 2 out of 3 scenario. This is not about, well, I've got 2 kids out of 3. That's close enough. That's not what this is about. He says faithful children. I mean, there's just no way around it. His children are faithful. None of them are accused of insubordination. Excuse me. That's not what this is about. It's also not about unbelieving adults who are children who grew up and left. It's not about this. It's talking about fathers who, through societal pressures, through the way culture is, they lived a certain length of time in their father's household, what kind of control he had over his family. That's what this is about. And there's reasons for that. So as we go through this, what this is about is the father's leadership in the home. That's really what we're asking. When we're looking at the children, we're saying, is the father a leader in his home? Also, does he have good testimony about those on the outside? In other words, if your children are running around robbing banks in town, you probably are not going to be seen in the best light in the communities, right? That's what this is about too. So these are judgments that we have to make. What about grown children? That's what sometimes brings up. I know a man is qualified to be an elder, but one of his children has gone astray, and he can't be an elder because of that. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6 is one of those passages. Look over there with me, because this is a really important one, and it's not just related to elders, but it's something I think we need to understand. Proverbs chapter 22. I'm going over, but I'm sorry. We got to do this. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. First of all, we need to recognize that Proverbs are generic. It's not always the case in all situations. He says, train up a child in the way he should go. Another thing is the way he should go there. Some scholars have translated that. I'm not a scholar. I read scholars who said that means more about in the way that they're bent, their natural inclinations. So you look at their personality, you look at their strengths and weaknesses, and you train them in the Lord according to those situations. We all know that children are different from each other, right? If you raise more than one child, you know that both of those kids are different, very different, and you treat them differently, try to be fair, but still different. So that's something to consider. And also, like I said, the verse here is generic, right? So to help illustrate that, look over in Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 7 and apply this to Jesus and see if it works. When a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies be at peace with him. Now, if you apply that to Jesus, you would say that's not right, because God made Jesus' enemies be at peace with him. You might say, well, later on, whenever he comes again, everyone will be at peace. That's obviously not peace. So these are generic ideas, and in applying that specifically to rule every single person in every situation is not a correct way to do it. It's a principle. It ought to be asked, Why did this person go off and go astray? Why did he grow up in the household and everything seemed to be well, but then when he got off on his own, he went off crazy? That should be asked, and it might disqualify a man. It very well could. But what you're asking is, what did he do in the house when he was there? If he made every effort, he was diligent, he did within reason everything that he could do, and the man just grew up, the boy or the girl just grew up and decided he's going to rebel and nothing is going to stop them, that person has free will. You can't control anyone. It's just the way it is. And so that has to be also considered in the situation. So there's more to consider here. Would you trust the advice on raising children of a man whose children aren't following God? Maybe. Depending on the situation, right? So that's why we have to ask these questions. And if you're an elder, you're hoping that people will be able to come to you for wisdom. That's what you're wanting. And if you have children who are rebellious, how is it that people are going to trust you? Good question. Is it because you're an absent father? Is it because the mother did all the work? Isn't that a possibility? It's even theoretically possible for the mother to do all the work and still have believing children, and the father did nothing. Isn't it possible? Yeah. So we have to ask questions, and that's why I wanted to discuss this a little bit more. All right, so I realize that this is not about it's very specific for a thing we're going through, but I hope that you see how we can reason through things, at least gives you some things to think about. And if you want to argue with me about it and you want to talk to me about it, please feel free. I'm not going to get offended. We can have a cordial discussion. I'll be happy to. And like I said, I'm never always right, but I do know what the scriptures teach, and I'm going to teach it as well as I can. If there's anything that you need from us today, from the church, you need prayers, we're here for you. We want to pray with you and pray for you. I hope that you will be praying about this process. And in just a second, I want to have a prayer, but I hope you'll be praying about this. And if you're not a Christian and you want to become a Christian, if you believe that Jesus is the Christ, you're willing to make that confession before men and repent of your sins, you can be baptized for the remission of your sins, and God will add you to his church, and we will welcome you with open arms. As we stand here in just a minute, I want you to please come. But first, let's have a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for your love. Thank you that you've been so good to us as a church and blessed us to the point now that we are attempting to put in elders. Lord, please help this process. If it's your will, let all of us who have put our names forward become elders here. If it's not your will, please, Father, stop us. We only want to do what is your will. Help the congregation here to all of us have unity together, to show love, to show respect, and to consider what you have to say above all things. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for this opportunity that we have to worship you today. We pray that you have been pleased with our efforts and that you will continue to be with us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.